What if the biggest driver of Earth's climate isn't us? It's the sun. They called him wrong. They called him dangerous. Some tried to end his career. But Dr. Willie Soon kept publishing. He kept pointing at the sky. And now, the sun is doing something it hasn't done in over a century. Something that could change everything we think we know about climate. Willie Soon was not born into controversy. He was born into curiosity. Growing up in Malaysia, he became fascinated by the sky, not just its beauty, but its mechanics. What powers it? What drives it? What, exactly, is the sun actually doing to this planet every single day? He earned his PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Southern California. He joined the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, one of the most prestigious research institutions on Earth. And he began asking the question that would define and divide his entire career. Is solar variability the most underestimated force in Earth's climate history? That question, simple as it sounds, would put him on a collision course with an entire scientific establishment. To understand why Willie Soon became so controversial, you have to understand the dominant climate narrative of the past 4 decades. Since the 1980s, the scientific consensus has centered on one primary driver: carbon dioxide. The argument is straightforward. Humans burn fossil fuels. CO2 accumulates in the atmosphere. The planet warms. The IPCC, the United Nations, governments around the world, they build entire policy frameworks around this model. Soon didn't deny that CO2 had an effect. What he challenged was its weight, its dominance, its role as a lead actor when he argued the sun had barely been given a speaking part. His research began pointing to a different story, one written in ice cores and ocean sediment, in tree rings going back thousands of years. A story where the sun's output, its cycles of activity and quietude, tracked eerily closely with periods of warming and cooling on Earth. Not perfectly, not mechanically, but closely enough to demand serious attention. In 2003, Soon co-authored a paper in the journal Climate Research that examined temperature records over the past 1,000 years. The paper argued that 20th century warming was not unusual when viewed against the full sweep of natural solar-driven variability. The reaction was immediate, ferocious. 2 editors resigned from the journal. Critics called the paper fundamentally flawed. The scientific community largely rejected it. But Soon did not retract. He did not apologize. He published again. So what exactly is Willie Soon's core scientific argument? Let's break it down, because it is more nuanced than his critics often admit. The sun is not a constant object. Its energy output fluctuates across multiple timescales. There's the well-known 11-year solar cycle, periods of high sunspot activity followed by solar minimum, when the sun becomes quieter. But there are also longer cycles. The Gleisberg cycle runs approximately 87 years. The Seuss cycle runs around 200 years. And there are others stretching over centuries and even millennia. Soon's research, particularly his work on total solar irradiance, the measurement of how much energy the sun sends toward Earth, argues that these longer cycles have been systematically underestimated in mainstream climate models. He published extensively on this, including in peer-reviewed journals such as Geophysical Research Letters, New Astronomy, and the Astrophysical Journal. His analysis of Arctic temperature records showed striking correlations between solar output and temperatures in the high northern latitudes, correlations that he argued were stronger than the correlations with CO2 forcing over the same period. He also pointed to cosmic rays. Building on the work of Danish physicist Henrik Svensmark, Soon explored the idea that when solar activity is low, more cosmic rays penetrate Earth's atmosphere, potentially seeding cloud formation and reflecting sunlight, cooling the planet. When solar activity is high, fewer cosmic rays get through, fewer clouds form, and the Earth warms. Could cloud cover, driven by solar magnetic cycles, be the thermostat that climate science has been overlooking? It is a hypothesis. It is contested. But it is also testable, and that in science is what matters. In 2015, the controversy surrounding Willie Soon reached a new peak. Greenpeace obtained documents through a Freedom of Information request that revealed Soon had received approximately $1.2 million in funding from fossil fuel companies, including Southern Company and ExxonMobil, over the course of more than a decade. Critics immediately charged that his research was compromised, that he was, in effect, a hired voice for the oil industry. The story ran in the New York Times. Congress sent letters to the Smithsonian. There were calls for investigation. Soon acknowledged the funding. He denied that it had any influence on his scientific conclusions. He pointed out that his critics themselves received substantial funding from governments and foundations with deeply invested positions on climate policy. He asked, with some force, whether the standard of scrutiny was being applied consistently. The Smithsonian conducted a review. No findings of scientific misconduct were made against his research. His defenders, including a number of scientists who engaged seriously with his work, argued that attacking the funding source was a way of avoiding the harder task, actually disproving his data. The scientific debate did not end. It intensified. Here is the question that should unsettle you. If Willie Soon is wrong, why has it taken so much effort to silence him rather than simply refute him with better data? Science advances by falsification, by showing where the evidence fails. And yet the most sustained response to Soon's work has not been a definitive solar study, proving his correlations are spurious. It has been attempts to remove him from the conversation entirely. That does not make him right. But it should make you think carefully about how scientific consensus is formed, defended, and sometimes enforced. Right now, in 2024, Solar Cycle 25 has surprised researchers with its activity. But the longer-term picture is different. Multiple solar physicists, not just Willie Soon, are warning that the sun may be entering a prolonged quiet period, a grand solar minimum. The last time something like this happened, between approximately 1645 and 1715, it was called a Maunder Minimum. Temperatures in Europe and North America dropped sharply. Rivers froze. Harvests failed. History called it the Little Ice Age. Willie Soon has been studying this possibility for years. And in part 2, we go into the data and the deeply uncomfortable question it raises for everything you've been told about the climate. Stay with us. If you want to understand the science behind this story, not the headlines, not the politics, but the actual research, subscribe now. Every video on this channel goes deep into Willie Soon's work and the scientific debate surrounding it. And drop a comment below. Do you think solar variability is being taken seriously enough in mainstream climate science? Let us know what you think. The sun has driven life on this planet for 4 billion years. It might not be finished with us yet. That was the Maunder Minimum, a 70-year period when sunspot activity nearly ceased, when the sun went quiet, and the Earth grew cold. Now, several solar physicists are watching the sun with growing attention. The signs are subtle. But according to the research of Dr. Willie Soon, they may be familiar. Is a new grand solar minimum beginning? And if it is, what does that mean for the planet? In part 1, we looked at who Willie Soon is, why his work became a lightning rod, and the core scientific argument he has spent his career building, that the sun's variable output is a primary and largely underappreciated driver of Earth's climate. In part 2, we go further. We look at the specific evidence he and colleagues have assembled around solar cycles and historical cooling events. We look at what the data says about where the sun may be heading. And we ask the hardest question of all. If the sun does enter a prolonged minimum over the next several decades, will our climate models, built almost entirely around CO2, be able to see it coming? Let us start with a historical record, because this is where Soon's argument carries its most striking weight. The Maunder Minimum, from roughly 1645 to 1715, was a period of dramatically reduced sunspot activity. Astronomer Edward Maunder documented it in the late 19th century using telescopic records stretching back to Galileo. During this period, temperatures across much of the northern hemisphere fell by as much as 1 degree Celsius compared to the centuries before. 1 degree does not sound like much, but average across a hemisphere over decades, it reshapes agriculture, destabilizes societies, and rewrites history. Before the Maunder Minimum came the Sporer Minimum, from approximately 1460 to 1550. Before that, the Wolf Minimum, around 1280 to 1350. Each corresponds, in historical and geological record, with periods of cooling and increased social stress in human civilizations. Soon's research, including work co-authored with colleagues like Sally Balinas and published in peer-reviewed journals, argued that these solar minima and the cooling events associated with them were not coincidental. The correlations, when examined across a range of proxy records, tree rings, ice cores, lake sediments, coral records, are persistent and geographically broad. Critically, Soon has also argued that the medieval warm period, a phase of relative warmth from roughly 900 to 1300 AD, aligns with a period of heightened solar activity, and that it was not merely a regional European phenomenon, as some mainstream models have characterized it, but a global signal. This matters, because if the medieval warm period was truly global and occurred without elevated CO2, it is evidence that natural solar forcing can produce significant warming at a planetary scale. And if warming can be produced naturally, then the uniqueness of modern warming, the cornerstone of the CO2-centric argument, becomes harder to assert. Soon's critics counter that while solar activity correlates with pre-industrial temperature records, the correlation breaks down after 1980. Since 1980, they argue, solar output has been flat or even slightly declining, while global temperatures have continued to rise. Therefore, the sun cannot explain recent warming. Soon's response to this is two-part. First, he questions the accuracy of current solar irradiance measurements, arguing that the satellite instruments used since 1978 show inconsistencies that make the flat output conclusion premature. Second, he points to the lag effect. The ocean system has enormous thermal inertia, meaning solar-driven changes may take decades to fully express themselves in surface temperatures. The warming we see today, he has argued, may partly reflect the sun's elevated output during the mid-20th century, working its way through the climate system. These are falsifiable claims. They are actively debated. They are not dismissed by all serious solar physicists. Now let's talk about what is happening to the sun right now, and what Willie Soon and other solar researchers are watching with close attention. Solar Cycle 25, which began in late 2019, has been more active than many predictions suggested. That is true, but the longer-term solar trend, as assessed through measurements of solar magnetic field strength and the behavior of successive solar cycles, has drawn concern from multiple research groups. Russian solar physicist Valentina Zarkova, whose work has some methodological overlap with Soon's broader arguments about solar drivers, published research suggesting the sun's magnetic activity could fall to a level not seen since the Maunder Minimum by the 2030s. Her models, built on analysis of solar dynamo activity, predict a 60% reduction in solar magnetic output over the coming decades. Willie Soon has been cautious about making specific predictions. That is, in fact, one of his more scientifically defensible qualities. But he has consistently argued that the possibility of a solar downer must be incorporated into climate projections, that ignoring it or treating it as irrelevant because CO2 is the dominant forcing is not science. It is assumption dressed as conclusion. If a grand solar minimum begins in the 2030s and global temperatures stabilize or drop, what will that mean for the models that told us they couldn't? This is not a political question. It is a scientific one. And Willie Soon has been asking it, in print, for over 2 decades. It is worth being precise about how the scientific community has responded to Soon's body of work, because the picture is more complex than either his champions or his detractors usually admit. A number of his papers have been published in reputable peer-reviewed journals. Others have been rejected, critiqued, or subjected to published rebuttals. This is how science is supposed to work. Gavin Schmidt of NASA GSS, one of the leading voices in mainstream climate science, has argued that Soon's solar correlations are selectively drawn and that more rigorous statistical analysis does not support the strength of the solar signal he claims to find. Schmidt and others have published counter-analyses directly challenging Soon's methodology. On the other side, a group of solar physicists and climate scientists, including some in Europe and Japan who are less exposed to the American academic pressure dynamics, have argued that the mainstream models do systematically underweight solar forcing, not to the degree that Soon sometimes claims. Perhaps, but enough to matter. The debate is real. It is not settled, and that, in itself, is significant. There is a pattern in the history of science. It does not always repeat, but it rhymes. Alfred Wegener proposed continental drift in 1912. He was ridiculed for decades. He died before the theory was accepted. Today, plate tectonics is a foundational framework of geology. Barry Marshall proposed that stomach ulcers were caused by a bacterium, Helicobacter pylori, not by stress and acid. His colleagues dismissed it. He drank a petri dish of the bacteria to prove his point. He won the Nobel Prize. This is not an argument that Willie Soon is right. History also contains scientists who were wrong and stayed wrong. But it is an argument for epistemic humility, for keeping the questions open, for not confusing the loudness of a consensus with its certainty. What do you believe is the most honest, scientifically responsible way to treat a dissenting researcher? Engage the data or silence the voice? Whatever you think of Willie Soon's conclusions, his career forces a question that modern science cannot afford to avoid. Are we studying climate or defending a conclusion about climate? The sun has been the engine of this planet's temperature for 4.5 billion years. Its cycles have driven ice ages and warm periods, extinctions and explosions of life, the rise and fall of entire civilizations. To write it out of the dominant narrative, to reduce it to a footnote while doubling down on a single atmospheric variable, is an extraordinary scientific claim. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, in both directions. Willie Soon has spent 30 years building a case. You have spent the last 18 minutes hearing it. The scientific community has spent 2 decades trying to refute it. Whether the sun is about to go quiet, whether a new little ice age is a real possibility or a phantom of incomplete data, will be answered not by consensus, not by politics, and not by funding sources. It will be answered by the sun itself. And right now, it is watching us debate. If this documentary made you think differently, or even made you angrier, that is exactly the point. Subscribe to this channel. Every video we make goes deep into Willie Soon's actual research, the science behind it, and the reactions it provokes. Comment below. Do you think a grand solar minimum would change the global conversation about climate change? Tell us honestly. We read every comment. Share this video with someone who thinks they already know everything about climate science. The most important conversations start with the most uncomfortable questions. The sun has been here longer than any theory about it. Maybe it is time we listen more carefully.